Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is Monday, July 30th, 2018. And the topic of tonight's discussion is what's up with America's Indo-Pacific economic vision. Relates to a speech Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, gave today regarding U.S. investment in the Indo-Pacific region. But before we get into the topic, let's take a look at what else happened during the day in the markets. Gold closed at $12.22. It had been as high as $12.24. It had opened around $12.20, fell to about $12.18. So gold was up slightly on the day. Silver up to $15.48. And silver had also started the day pretty low at around $15.37. Had a nice pickup to about $15.45. Even hit a high of $15.51 and then edged back down to about $15.48. Platinum and palladium were pretty much flat. Now, the Dow was down 144 points. NASDAQ down 107. We're still seeing the aftermath of these FANG stocks, Facebook, Twitter, hitting down. The NASDAQ was down 1.39%. And the other exchanges, major exchanges, the Dow Jones and the S&P were only down about 0.5%. So the NASDAQ clearly taking the brunt of the hit so far. Over at the cryptocurrencies, they have been treading water lately. Bitcoin, I believe, the last time I looked at it, you keep looking and you see that they've changed every few minutes. But I think the last time I checked just a few minutes ago that Bitcoin was below 8,200. But let me just check and see if it's moved up. And it is at 8170. Yep, so it's actually up slightly over the 24-hour period. It did have a drop during the day, but pretty much was flat all day. Bitcoin Cash 814. What's very interesting about the cryptocurrencies, if you look at the charts of the top 10 coins, they pretty much follow in unison the chart pattern of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's flat, and all of a sudden, Bitcoin decides it's going to drop 2 or 3%. The other coins drop 2, 3, 4, 5%. Bitcoin recovers, the other coins recover. And it's also interesting if you look at the charts, when Bitcoin recovers in somewhat of a V shape, the other coins have less of a V, meaning they have to take a little time to catch on to make sure the rally is real. I don't know. I find it a little odd that all the cryptos trade in a very tight style pattern. They're all different. They all have different uses. They have different value. I'm very surprised that they trade the way they do. And this is they trade across all the multiple platforms, and they still, with all the number of different platforms, seem to trade in somewhat in unison, which I think is mathematically difficult unless there's something going on, but I don't know what it is. All right, let us get into tonight's topic. This is an important topic. It's called What's Up with America's Indo-Pacific Economic Vision. Mike Pompeo gave a speech today announcing $113 million in initiatives into Indo-Pacific today to counter the Chinese. Now, what's interesting is when the story first hit, the Reuters headline said that this was an initiative for the United States, and it was mentioning that it came at a time when there's these trade frictions with China. And there was a quote saying a senior U.S. official said this was not aimed at countering China's Belt and Road Initiative, which consists mostly of state-led infrastructure projects linking Asia and parts of Africa and Europe. The second headline changed to wary of China's rise, Pompeo announces U.S. initiatives, and didn't mention any direct rejection of the idea that this was aimed at China's Belt and Road. Now, when I first saw this, that was the first thing I thought of, is why is the United States sticking its nose into Indo-Pacific other than to interfere with China's Belt and Road. Now, I had covered this a while back. There is a project that very few people have heard about. U.S.-led group, the Quad, is talked about sometime last year launching a Belt and Road competitor. And in that article, I talked about how the United States, India, Australia, and Japan had outlined a strategy to go after a lot of infrastructure projects and, in a sense, compete with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Now, for those people that follow the Chinese Belt and Road, that really gets you riled up like bricks. I mean, if you have full-on dollar collapse, game over, game changer, gold derangement syndrome, that once China takes over and crushes the dollar, then your gold price is going to go up. You love the Belt and Road. The Belt and Road gets you as excited as the bricks, gets you excited like the gold-backed yuan. All these stories are designed to inform you of something you don't know with little context, but these are game changers. And if you don't know about the Belt and Road, well, it's going to end dollar hegemony and introduce a multipolar world, and the dollar is going to collapse and gold is going to go skyrocketing. Well, yes, China does have a Belt and Road initiative, but the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, really, if you look at it, it is an extension of how they built their own economy on massive amounts of debt. Now, in the Chinese economy, it's pretty easy, not easy, but you have to give the Chinese a lot of credit for the way they've borrowed enormous sums of money, built enormous amounts of projects, built enormous number of factories, shipped an enormous number of goods based on that credit-based system, which, by the way, most of it is borrowed in dollars. We're going to get to that in a second. But now that they're running out of steam in the Chinese economy, one of the reasons they wanted to build out the Belt and Road was because they could then create infrastructure and thereby continue to build out and then hopefully create an economic zone that they would dominate and create trade, and that would be a really good thing for China because they can extend basically what they have in China to the rest of the world, because obviously they know that they're slowing down. However, as we've mentioned a few weeks ago in Trainwreck on China's Belt and Road, this is not a sure bet that China is going to be able to pull this off. This requires building infrastructure in many places and requires foreign investment. And what the Quad, the US-led Indian, Australian, and Japanese initiative is designed to do is either pick up the pieces where China fails, bid competitively on projects that the Chinese are bidding on, and thus maybe raising the cost of China's infrastructure projects, or provide bridge financing and cooperation where certain Chinese projects aren't working. But the other day, the early part of this month, we reported on how Malaysia suspended a key Chinese rail project. And this was one of the big projects that China was working on because it was going to connect China with Malay Peninsula. And this was a $20 billion Belt and Road project that eventually was going to lead to crushing the dollar because everyone along the Belt and Road was going to use the Chinese yuan and no one was going to use the dollar, and that would be end of dollar hegemony, and then gold was set to skyrocket. And as you know, if you have gold derangement syndrome, you believe these stories as if they are definitely going to happen. Not just there's a prospect of something happening, but that the prospect means it did happen, and then every consequence that you're told happens from that is already a sure thing. In fact, it's a mathematical certainty. Well, the Belt and Road is no certainty, and today what's interesting, what they announced, now, by the way, with that train wreck, I'm talking about the suspension of the $20 billion Chinese Belt and Road, that was the new government looking at the deal. A lot of these third world or emerging market countries are suspicious of the Chinese model of going in. They're concerned, and I know everyone likes to say the United States just goes in and with the military and China does this all in peace and harmony. That's not the case. It may be the case with the U.S. military, but there's also many examples of U.S. projects whereby, and we're going to get into the part where Pompeo's talking about, where they allow the companies in the free market to create the economic activity, whereas this case, this is basically China moving its made in China to made outside of China, but by Chinese in the Asian and Southeast Asian economic zones. All right, so let's look at what happened today with Mike Pompeo. So he gives this speech. Now remember, they already have the Quad, and $113 million in initiative is essentially nothing. But why is he giving a speech now about this? Well, what's been happening with China? Just as the United States, when the United States announced its tariffs, the Chinese had been making a lot of noises about how they were going to start deleveraging. They were very much aware that they had built their economy on shifting sands, and a lot of projects were not economical. Most of the borrowing they had done was done in dollars. It still is done in dollars. In fact, there's a story here, it just came across my wire. Emerging market dollar credit binge extends to $3.7 trillion. Dollar debt rises 16% in year to March. Credit issued has surged to 3.7% end of March, fueled by a 16% year-on-year rise, says the BIS, according to Bloomberg. Close to $500 billion comes from China, by far the biggest single issuer. So all these people telling you, end of dollar hegemony, China to crush the dollar. They're missing the fact that China runs its credit-fueled binge on dollars. So they're not going to crush the dollar. They need the dollar. Now, that might be wise of them, but that's how they structured their economy. They structured their economy in order to be a low-cost producer of goods so they can get dollars. The yuan is not an international asset by any stretch of the imagination. Central banks don't hold it, don't want it. Why? The yuan is constantly subject to devaluation. Why? That's the Chinese model. They need to have a cheap yuan. That's part of what they're doing in order to be the low-cost producer. All right. So what China had realized, however, and they've got some very smart people there figuring out their economy. They have to. It's centrally planned. Well, they weren't counting on these tariffs, so they were also in the process of shutting down polluting factories. There was an article today. They're closing down, I think, 2,200 factories. Well, that has an impact. Well, they thought, well, they'll deleverage, they'll shut down the factories, they'll edge those out. But tariffs throw them for a loop because they're counting on that revenue that they were going to get from sending cheap goods to the United States. So, what have they done in response? They've loosened credit. They've lowered capital requirements on banks. They've let the yuan slide. They're increasing subsidies to state-owned enterprises that are hurt by the tariffs. They're lowering taxes on those companies. And they just announced the other day they're going to revitalize infrastructure projects. Now they're saying that these aren't going to be bridges to nowhere and more skyscrapers, but things that people need, like parking lots. You have to wonder, weren't they building parking lots the last 5 or 10 years? Now they're going to start building parking lots. So it sounds like they need to keep borrowing and spending and building. And they're going to have to come up with the shortfall on the tariffs from somewhere else. Now, why does Pompeo announce this $113 million in initiatives? And it's interesting how Reuters says first it's got nothing to do with the countering China's Belt and Road Initiative. I say nonsense. It has everything to do with it. This is a squeeze play that I mentioned the other day, where the United States did the same thing with the meeting with Juncker in Europe. China said they had to come up with things to do tit for tat on tariffs, but China doesn't import as many things from the United States as the U.S. imports from China, so they had to put them on the biggest things that they import. And what did they do? They put tariffs on natural gas and soybeans. Well, those are things that they need. And that would hurt the U.S. because the U.S. likes to export the soybeans, but they apparently managed to sell them to the Europeans and also to sell the natural gas to the Europeans. So Pompeo goes and makes this speech, and the second headline that Reuters came up with was wary of China's rise. Pompeo announces U.S. initiatives, but there's no such denial that this is not trying to counter Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. But let's look at the language of what Pompeo said, because that's the most important. Forget what Reuters and how anyone wants to interpret it is not. It's cherry picked. But I'll cherry pick some things out of Pompeo's speech that I read. Pompeo says this: when we say free, in quotes, Indo-Pacific, we want all nations, every nation, to be able to protect their sovereignty from coercion by other countries. Now, what does he think he's saying there? He's talking about China going into these countries with economic development plans and basically taking them over. He doesn't say that, but what's he referring to? Then he says at the national level, quote, free means good governance and the assurance that the citizens can enjoy their fundamental rights and liberties. Then he says, now to be clear, the U.S. government doesn't tell American companies what to do. And again, by implication, the Chinese state-owned enterprises clearly will tell the companies what to do. But then you get into the God bless America stuff. But we help build environments that foster good, productive capitalism. Again, China, not capitalist. We help American firms succeed so that local communities can flourish and bilateral partnerships can grow. So clearly this is aimed at China. It's aimed as a, look, we know we've been talking about America first, and we know they're the big bad bully of the world, and we've got the military, and we pulled out of TPP. Then he says, I know some are wondering about America's role in the region in light of President Trump's decision to pull out of TPP. That's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He says, while we work with our partners to craft better and higher standard bilateral trade agreements, our companies are continuing to advance U.S. economic interests by growing their presence in the region. For example, a number of U.S. companies in Singapore has increased 10% over the past 10 years. Now, there's a guy in this other report, Brian Hook, senior policy advisor to Mike Pompeo, said the United States is not competing with Chinese, mostly state-led initiatives. Okay. He says, it is a made in China, made for China initiative, criticizing what China's doing. He says, our way of doing things is to keep the government's role very modest, and its focus on helping businesses do what they do best. This is, in a sense, a strategic move to say, look, if you're going to come in, you want people to build your businesses, go the American model. Don't go the top-down Chinese model. Now, when you see China has to lost, for example, the Malaysian train deal, this starts to look more attractive. Because, remember, companies are less... all companies that do business could pull out of deals. But then there's other companies, other American companies that can go in. But if China decides they're not going to do a deal, or then that's the end of the deal. Then they're stuck. Now, in this case, the Malaysian case with the train, sounds like Malaysia told them we don't want to do this deal anymore. And I guess a lot of these countries are getting wet feet. There's been issues with China going into Africa and creating a disturbance with mining rights. So the idea that China is just striding across the globe in peace and harmony, and it's going to create this new multipolar world where the dollar is no longer the hegemon of the world, and it's a big game changer, and gold is going to go higher. That's not really what's happening right now. Now it says, the Belt and Road Initiative is meant to recreate the Silk Road. But many have said, according to this article, it's about spreading Chinese influence and hooking countries on massive debts. And that is according to an article in, it's called NDTV. But they're citing this guy Hook, who I'd never heard of, but I guess he is a policy advisor to Pompeo. And then he says that they welcome Chinese contributions to regional development. Again, that's where the Quad comes in, is if the United States can opportunistically, along with India and Australia and Japan, work with the Chinese, they will. That's the other thing. When people act like India is tied at the hip to China against the United States, and that Russia tied at the hip with China against the United States. India and China are not buddies. They have regional disputes up in the mountains there. India has arrangements with the United States like the Quad. Russia historically is an enemy of China. Now, some have pointed out, which is true, that Chinese-Russian relations are probably the best they've ever been. But Putin is no fan of and does not want a powerful China to his south and east. So they work together, but they're not walking lockstep. Even when they were both communists in the true sense of the word, they were not big partners. They're always able, that's one of the strategies of the U.S. is always to try to drive a wedge between the two of them. And then this guy Hook says, we know that America's model of economic engagement is the healthiest for neighbors in the region. So this is a hearts and mind. This is not about announcing $100 million, which is nothing. This is about saying the United States is going to put its influence in this part of the region as an alternative to the Chinese initiative. And they're pointing out that, yes, in scale and scope, what the United States is doing is nothing compared to what China is planning on doing. But the problem with China's planning on doing, China's planning on if we build it, they will come. And that's very risky for a country that already has massive debts, because if they want to go and build infrastructure that may or may not be used around the areas, that's going to be a problem. And then your countries are going to be stuck with infrastructure that's an eyesore that isn't used. So none of this is guaranteed to happen. But this guy Prasad, and this again from the same article from NDTV, is saying that it does highlight the differences between what China is trying to do, you know, this government-led type thing, and what the United States government is doing. Now, if you're actually a student of economics, you clearly would prefer what the United States wants to do in terms of not running it as a state-run project, everything, but creating an environment where local companies and U.S. companies can invest in projects that might make sense. Remember, a lot of the Chinese-led projects, even in their own country, which are dollar-financed, are financed with other goals in mind than to turn a profit. That's why they have to loosen capital requirements, always extending loans. That's why they have non-performing loans in every industry. And in some industries, the non-performing loans are 50%. Now, you don't get that in a capitalist society because they go bankrupt. I know we've had bailouts and so on, but bailouts are still the exception in the United States. A lot of the Chinese debt just is allowed to be extended, is ordered to be extended by the PBOC, People's Bank of China. And in many instances, they convert it into equity, not actually giving equity shares, but just characterizing it as equity because they say, well, you're never going to get paid back, so we might as well call it equity. So that's what happened today, and I think it's another... It's another shot at trying to contain China's growing influence, and I think the tariffs are the thing that really stopped China in its tracks, because they were on a plan where they were going to try to deleverage, and now they're going the other way around. They said they were at a Minsky moment where maybe we can't keep borrowing, and maybe we've already borrowed too much and there's no return on the borrowing. And now they're back to, well, the only thing we could do now is lend more money, extend more loans, loosen capital requirements on banks, let the yuan slide, increase subsidies, and then start doing more infrastructure projects. That doesn't sound like game over for the dollar. Dollar collapse, end of dollar hegemony to me. Does it to you? Let's take a look at some of the comments that we have. All right. Chrono Trigger fan, interesting topic tonight, Lewis. I want to get you on again, Mr. Chrono Trigger fan, because I know you would. A lot of people believe that somehow China is economically designed to be against the U.S., and you would point it out. They actually, I mean, it's obvious to me, they're working with the United States. They may not like the fact that they are a partner in this, in which they receive dollars, worthless dollar, toilet paper, and so on. That's the bed that they made. that was the whole plan, was that they were going to make a lot of cheap goods and they were going to industrialize their economy. And the way they were going to do that was based on a credit-fueled system, and they were going to ship goods out to Europe and the United States. Now, they may be looking around and saying, well, we can consume this at home, but you can't just flip the switch and say, okay, well, forget those trillions of dollars worth of trade we had with United States and Europe. We're just going to go build infrastructure along the Silk Road and Belt and whatever they call it, Belt and Suspenders Road, and, you know, we'll just take over the world that way. That can't happen that way. I mean, remember, any transition when you are growing rapidly to transitioning and trying to do it quickly, and then you slam on the brakes, you create economic chaos. And in China, economic chaos means tens and hundreds of millions of people all of a sudden don't have work, don't have money. That's untenable. So China can't make these bold moves where they're just going to stand for delivery and crush the dollar because they've had it with the BRICS. So, I mean, I hear that stuff. It's beyond cringing. It's almost like, in one sense, you're saying the Chinese are brilliant. They read Sun Tzu. And in another minute, they're just going to, like, crush the dollar. The most moronic thing they could possibly try to do, would never even plan on doing. Just like they were going to do a gold-backed yuan. When you're a credit-driven economy, you don't back your yuan with gold, and you don't hand your gold out. You'll be without gold in about 3 weeks. All right. Joseph DeMarco. Now, Carl Joseph DeMarco lived in China for 15 years. The Chinese actually don't build too many parking lots. Well, that's interesting. Well, at least now they're on it. They're saying we got to do infrastructure. They didn't build any parking lots, according to Carl Joseph DeMarco. Now they're gonna start building parking lots. Good for them. It's a big problem in Shenzhen. If you guys are interested, we did an interview with Carl a while back, and it was called, I'll get you the name for it. I'm going to give you the link for that one, because you want to get some insight from people who actually lived in the country, rather than people who just write newsletters and telling you the game is changing and it's end of dollar hegemony and all this other stuff. I try to get people on who have studied this, not from the 2 + 2 = gold, or I have gold derangement syndrome and I'm going to explain to you why the dollar is going to collapse next week. I think that's, you do a disservice. Look, I like gold and silver, but I don't like the nonsense, the narratives that get pumped, and then they insist on these narratives. I can't say that enough. It happens all the time. People telling me this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And they've been telling me for 10 years these fantastical stories. And someone has to realize, well, there's a reason why they don't happen. Okay, so if you look up China Weird, Ghost and Gold with Carl Joseph, every time I hear Joe, I'm going to say Carl Joseph Watson, Carl Joseph DeMarco. All right, that's on, oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to give you the link for that. I'm going to do that right now, and it's going to start, and you might hear it. Ah, you didn't hear it. Good. All right, let me give you the link so that you can check out Carl's interview. By the way, I'm not promoting the mugs tonight, but here is. But if you're interested in a mug, I mailed out so many of them today. Actually, I had to go to FedEx because there was a line at the post office, and I just bit the bullet and I took the extra hit on the postage to ship to via FedEx. If you're interested in buying a Smaulgld mug, you could do so. I'm still shipping them out personally, although the Smaulgld store is now open and you can visit that and you can buy. I have an interesting one. I have an eraser with a Control-Alt-Delete on the back. It's good for explaining to people who maybe never use pen and paper how people used to erase. And it's a real game changer. So check out the Smaulgld store. All right. Carl Joseph DeMarco says there's now a 2-year waiting list for vehicle registration. Might be longer now. It takes 2 years to get a driver's license, except expats already have a valid license. Well, that's good to know if anyone's going there. Siamo autorizzati a implicare italiano. He's going to start speaking Italian to me. Most Chinese. Well, let's see. Most Chinese are pretty cynical about the whole Belt and Road public image. Well, yeah. I mean, the Belt and Road, first of all, if you are Chinese and you're of the view China first, that doesn't, why would you be interested in that? And why would you go nuts over the Belt and Road. The people who go nuts over are the same people who go nuts over the BRICS are U.S. gold pumpers. So, Carl, do you want to cuss and swear? Is that what you're saying? I don't understand why you are asking me. Okay, I can't remember the Chinese right now, but there's a phrase they use, something like the government never changes, only face of the emperor. Okay? Ed Moley, I bought again today, paid $83 for a nice 5-ounce bar. Oh, good. Yes, silver is on sale. $15.50. These are prices we haven't seen, and as I mentioned the other night, the price of silver right now is the same price as it was 10 years ago. So definitely, of all the assets that have gone up and asset inflation, clearly silver has not had it, and it's not pumping. It's just a fact that silver is at a point where I would think it is undervalued. I'm not giving investment advice, but it's just factual that every asset under the sun, and even some that I would say shouldn't have gone up, have gone up, and silver hasn't. All right, so Ed Moll is stacking away. Carl Joseph DeMarco, Belt and Road countries are minuscule trade-wise. Most are insignificant. Well, that's the point. See, this is the whole idea that people, they just say, oh, they're going to build all this infrastructure. Yeah, you know, there's places in Kazakhstan where no one lives for hundreds of miles. I mean, it's not like it's a chicken-egg thing for sure. But remember, they're saying this is like bigger than the Marshall Plan. But what was the difference between the U.S. Marshall Plan after World War II? The United States invested the equivalent of billions of dollars in rebuilding European infrastructure, and what China is trying to do across the Belt and Road. Well, the difference is those are areas in Europe that had already been industrialized, and there were cities. Much of the Belt and Road is an economic wasteland and always has been. So to invest that kind of money in that is very, very risky. Chrono Trigger fan Mike Morrell Super Spook went on Charlie Rose early in the Trump administration saying that challenging the BRICS on the OBOR was, and I quote, a mistake. Things change, bro, says Ed. And Anita A, right. Dictatorships are not easy to keep under control. So the last thing China wants to do is be your gold buddy and do something dramatic to crush the dollar and then have their entire economy and society collapse. But I will say that there's a far greater chance of gold going higher because of some type of collapse in China than any type of nonsense about gold-backed yuan or something that China does to crush the dollar. If anything, China will implode on its own, and that'll cause a stampede perhaps into gold. I'm not predicting that, but that's far more likely to happen than any of these initiatives like Belt and Road, Game Changers, BRICS to crush the dollar. Chrono Trigger fan wrote an article on a few years ago. Morrell, former DD CIA, did say America should resist the sea lanes of OBOR, but not the land route. Looks like Trump is changing that to some extent. Yeah, why don't you come on and we'll talk about that? That'd be very interesting for our listeners. Nita A just read China makes billion harvesting organs by people not uncontinuous. Ed Mole reading history for more than 20 years. All right. Monetary history. It's good to know your monetary history. But we need to be cognizant. A lot of people are stuck on this. Gold has been money for 5,000 years, period. Gold is money, period. If you remember how gold was selected as money, it was selected as money and became money for 5,000 years because it was voluntary. The government just picked on it because that's what everybody wanted. But there's nothing to say that everyone will always want gold. I know it's hard to imagine. Now, the example I like to use is horses are transportation, period. People have been using horses to get around for 5,000 years. People will always use horses for transportation. Maybe not. Something else comes along that people view serves their purpose better. I'm not advocating Bitcoin, but that could be one of the things. If people think it's a store of value, I don't, but some people do. If people believe something is a store of value, if people believe it's easier to transact in a cryptocurrency, what I think is irrelevant. That's what people don't understand is the world has a bigger influence on the markets than you do, no matter how smart you think you are. If everybody is bidding up assets for 10 years, and you're like, I would never buy that, okay, you're smarter than they are, but they're richer than you are. Anyway, I hear people insisting that they're better off holding an asset like silver for 10 years than something else. You can tell yourself that, But you're not, because value is based on the number of goods and services you can procure or buy with whatever you have of value to exchange. And if you had silver for 10 years, didn't have much value to exchange. Oh, but you had ounces. So what? You think they're valuable. The market, or the manipulated market, however you want to phrase it, didn't think so. So I try that to me is silver derangement syndrome. I like silver, but I can't insist that it was better. If you tell yourself you were better off holding that for 10 years, I don't know how you can justify that. I'm not promoting the mug, then promotes the mug. Shark Air, once you're a mug promoter, you can't get rid of it. Now you're going to get me talking about the mugs. Mugs are real value, Shark Air. By the way, here comes a pitch. Did you buy yours yet? How do you expect this show to continue unless you actually buy a mug? I've sold dozens of these things. People love them, and mugs are real wealth. Measure your wealth in mugs. Ed Mole retracted a message. I hope he wasn't cussing and swearing. I can't take that. Even in Italian, Carl Joseph DeMarco. Yeah, I thought if we can't cuss in English, we might be able to do so in Italiano or Chinese. Non è vero. Non in questo. Okay, not here. Non qui. All right. Ed Mole. Trillions. Really? We are still subsidizing the EU. Yep. On the other hand, the goal line, says Carl Joseph DeMarco, for at least one B&R project is rail transport to Europe, bypassing U.S. naval dominance, so there's that. Oh, clearly, there's going to be victories along the way for China. Clearly, there already have been. But what I'm opposed to is this idea that somehow China just is going to inexorably march and take over the world, and all that's going to be good for everybody because China is smart. China likes gold. China plays the long game. China listens to Sun Tzu. They know what they are doing. No, they don't. They know kind of what they're doing, just like everybody else. They're not supermen. They are basically, it has nothing even to do with Chinese. It has to do with their form of communism and command and control economies. You know, when people say fiat currencies never last more than 40 years, every fiat currency that was ever born has died. Okay, that's true. Every command and control economy that's ever been created has also died and has also failed spectacularly. So people that are cheering on China, you have to realize they're running a fiat currency, they're running a debt-based, credit-driven economy, and it's a totalitarian government control. It's got nothing to do with Chinese or China. It's just what it is. So to think that somehow that's a lock, but it doesn't make any sense. Sure, the dollar's going to end one day, but so is a top-down economy like China's. Chrono Trigger fan said, let's do it. Yep. All right. We'll work on that after the show, getting a time and a date. Anita A, a digital currency is coming and needs no backing other than you cannot buy or sell without it. Well, Anita, that's very perceptive. That's exactly the point of a fiat currency. This is what you shall use to buy and sell. And if that is what you can use to buy and sell, having more of that than something that you think is valuable, you're better off with what they want you to use, as long as whoever's telling you to use it is in power. Obviously, just use Stalin or Hitler or any dictatorship, or the South during the Civil War, when they had fiat currency. When those regimes die, well, then their currency dies because the guy ordering the fiat, ordering the currency to be worth something, is not there anymore. So yes, but while the people who are in power are issuing a digital or fiat currency and they're making everyone use it, that's the one to collect. Now, should you protect yourself with something that's not fiat? Absolutely. But should you think that, well, I guess you can think whatever you want, but it's all a matter of probability. Is the United States dollar really going to collapse? I mean, they've been saying this. And I mentioned this the other night, and someone got upset. I said, Ron Paul's been saying this since 1981, 1979, or whatever. They said, well, he's not wrong. I'm like, of course he's wrong. How can he be right? Well, he's just early. Not if it's your whole life. What good does it do if the dollar collapses? I mean, I'm sure they were talking about in Rome in 222 how what they were doing was unsustainable. And then Rome collapsed in 476. So the guy who mentioned it in 222 was complaining about the denarius going down in value and how this is unsustainable. He was right. But I don't know. I just hear people, they insist it's mathematically uncertain, end of dollar hegemony. All right. Dr. Modesto, Obar's rail component. The U.S. naval base in Singapore can put a straight razor through China's carotid artery if America's wanted to stop China's oil import. That's another thing people don't realize about China. China does have a #1 gold production, whatever that's worth. I mean, it's worth something. But they only get like 450 tons a year. So that doesn't satisfy their demand for gold. But they have rare earths. That's a huge thing. I think 90-some-odd% of the world's rare earth metals are in China. So that's a big plus. That's a big plus. They don't have much oil. They're a national oil company. They don't have the oil and natural gas to supply their big needs. So that is a weak spot in the Chinese economy. Anita A. Smaulgld mug's the best thing since Wonder Bread. Did you order one? I'm not sure if you... I don't recognize names from some of the people that order. They're not the screen names that they're using. Ed Mall. I bought from 2003 to 2011, sold at 45. Good for you. It worked fine. SM Dunce. See, once you have silver derangement syndrome, anything you say against silver, then you're a traitor. Then you don't understand. You're a moron, and you're just not part of the club anymore. You lack integrity. You just don't understand real money. All right. But I bet you don't have a mug. And if you don't have a mug, can you be a real whatever? All right. Dr. Modesto, AVD, World Bank co-financing Obor's railway. And most failed fiat. Anita's on a roll here. And most failed fiats were replaced with fiat. Yeah, look at 2008. Everyone says, oh, if there's a collapse, they're going to be clamoring for gold for confidence. If there ever was a time to clamor for gold and silver for confidence, it was 2008. After the financial crisis. What did they do? They just printed up more fiat. Were there people out in the streets protesting? Gold, 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 must have gold. Silver, silver, silver. No. And that's 10 years ago. There's even fewer people alive today that even remember silver coinage. Probably none, hardly, that remember gold coinage. All right. Yes, Dr. Modesto Esquire, this whole thing about China is exactly what we heard, if you're old enough to remember, what we heard in the 80s. Japan was going to take over the world, the land of the rising sun. The way people cite Sun Tzu today, they were citing Shogun, and they were citing samurai warriors and all kinds of stuff that I think they said that, I remember investment bankers were dyeing their hair black because they wanted to have an advantage in the boardroom when they were negotiating, like the Japanese. I mean, there was a period of time, and here's the thing about the Japanese. What were the Japanese doing? Same thing the Chinese were doing similarly, in that it was state-run. It was basically centrally planned. Look at the Japanese now. They're so state-planned that the Bank of Japan buys all of the state-issued bonds. And they just run out of... and that's going to happen to China. Maybe worse. I mean, China is not the same as Japan in the sense that China is much larger geographically. It's got a much more diverse population. Has got people living in cities that weren't even there 20 years ago. Japan's growth was not the same. I mean, a lot of the major cities in Japan had been there even before World War II. A lot of these Chinese cities, the names I never heard of because they didn't exist. Buy low, sell hard. That's right. We remember. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Drunk Octopus. Good to see you. Someone said this trade war was all on purpose so that China can strengthen its relationships in Eastern Europe, Russia, etc., to make them less dependent on U.S. imports. Could be. Now remember, the U.S. doesn't call all the shots, just as China doesn't call all the shots. And there is some Sun Tzu probably in all this, but that's a very good question. I mean, that's the type of question people should be looking at. The problem I have with the analysis is that everybody looks at it, at least the analysis that I read, because it's gold and silver, They look at it from the point of view of gold and the impact on gold, gold's game changer, and then they construct their scenarios and their projections and their predictions around what would be best for gold. That's not what's best for reality. So it's a very good question, Drunk Octopus. Possibly. I mean, who knows? And then you have to ask, what would happen then? What would be the relationship to gold? That's a better way of looking at it, rather than trying to figure out what would be good for gold and then saying this is going to happen, game changer, game over, end of dollar hegemony, gold 50,000. Should add, says Carlos DeMarco, that gold and silver mining led to war economy because empires needed to conquer other people for slaves. It wasn't actually a trade like had New World. Someone mentioned the other night, I wish I remember his name, he mentioned when I was giving that Pieces of 8 talk, that the Pieces of 8 was essentially the world's currency during the period of time in which there was a slave trade. It's very interesting. Dr. Yeah, showing off his history. If you count Byzantium, yes, the Roman Empire lasted until the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453. Also, and I haven't done this one yet, while the denarius was debased down to 2% from 98%, and by 476 the Roman Empire was done, that eastern portion of the empire had a thing called the soldius, which was a gold coin that was used throughout that empire. And that's what the Italians call money, soldi. They don't call it denari. They do have denario, which dinaro, which is also money, but the real money is soldi. That's the gold coin. 1453 Constantinople, which is present day. Looking for the answer. Anyone know the present day Constantinople? All right. True. Why more Germany recovered with another fiat? Absolutely. We haven't had examples in the last 50 years where an economy has gone through hyperinflation and then said, uh-oh, that was stupid. Roll out the gold. People they keep insisting gold is money for 5,000 years. Gold is money, period. Maybe it should be, but the world doesn't seem to take that point of view. Well, they are wrong, and they will soon find out. Okay. All right. Database DNA. That was the one who was defending Ron Paul predicting the end of dollar collapse since 1980. Actually, Ron Paul was involved in the Gold Commission when things got really bad at the end of the 70s and early 80s, even when Reagan took over, and Reagan actually commissioned, is there a way we can get out of this deep recession? And Ron Paul and Lou Lehrman, who would run for governor, was a businessman in New York, they wrote the Gold Commission papers, and by the time they finished writing it, the economy had pretty much turned around, so they didn't do it. And although I think Ron Paul and Lou Lehrman had recommended that they make those silver and gold eagles. They were the first time the American government made real bullion coins since the 1933 for gold and 1964 for silver. I mean, they made commemoratives here and there, but nothing like on the wide scale we now have American gold, American silver eagles. Okay. I've been listening to Ron Paul's show for a couple of years. I didn't hear him use any of the silver pump. No, I was never saying that Ron Paul was a silver pumper. Ron Paul does pump gold, but what I was saying was that he has had, and you can look them up, he has made many predictions, without a date, granted, on the dollar collapse. I mean, he has been going on about that for decades. How many years ago was we commented the dollar? I can pull him. I had him up the other day. VJ, who's a subscriber here and has been on the show, he sent me one the other day from the 90s. I have the whole point of the Gold Commission was that the dollar had gone off of the Bretton Woods gold standard. And if you read Ron Paul's book, the Gold Commission report that he co-authored with Lou Lehrman, that was his concern. You read it, it sounds like he's repeating himself today. It's not that he's wrong. It's just that I guess either the world has, hallucinated around that somehow the debt fiat currencies are okay. Look what's happened. Countries used to hold gold in reserve when they traded. And a country that was doing well had more gold, and a country that had a trade deficit had less gold. Well, today, that's all thrown out the window. Countries' biggest assets that they have a lot on their balance sheets are U.S. treasuries. It's insanity, but that's the way it is. Look at Gade Wannabe's career now compared to Michael Keaton's. Database DNA. There's a big difference between Ron Paul, Lynette Zhang, Richards, Jim Willey. Yet you speak about them like they're on the same level. No, I don't. You interpret that. look, if 10 people say the dollar's going to collapse, they all said the same thing. That doesn't mean that there can be one person who's really smart who said it and one complete moron who said it. If they all said it, they said it. And if I think this statement, I'm not saying, I don't even know what those people, if someone says something that I don't agree with or I think is incorrect, it doesn't mean because I disagree with that point that I am shamming everything they've ever said in their life. So if Ron Paul says the dollar's going to collapse and it doesn't, that doesn't mean I put him on the same level as a complete imbecile or I put him on the same level as a silver pumper. No, it just means he did say and has been saying the dollar is shaky and the dollar's not going to make it. And my point is, he's wrong. The dollar has made it. Now, he may be reasonable. He's written books. I've read his books and the Fed. I've read the one on school homeschooling. I'm not criticizing him as an intellect. I'm not criticizing him for his libertarian point of view. I'm saying he's been saying this and he's been wrong. That doesn't mean he's like a moron. It just means he's wrong. Shark Air, they all... And by the way, if he doesn't own a Smaulgld mug, well, you have to question. Shark Air. They have built cities that no one lives there. Anita A. Gold and silver as money will come to an end at the end of the age. Carl Joseph DeMarco and Dr. Modesto win the prize. Istanbul is now what was Constantinople. And Anita A. looks like she has the final comment. You must have a globe run on debt if you want to create a digital currency. Yeah, you know, that's the other thing that Rogoff guy said. That the only way you can run negative interest rates, as if that's what we need to do, is you need to have a digital currency. Otherwise, people will hoard cash. Anita A. People don't understand we're entering times like never before. They look at history. Another insightful point, Ms. Anita A. There's nothing wrong with looking at history. In fact, you'd be foolish not to look at history. History often serves as a guide. They say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, all the cliches. But then there's also the whole investment advice they say is that past performance is not indicative of future performance or future returns. So when people say, well, this happened and it always happened, therefore it's always going to happen, that's very short-sighted. Gold is money, period. All fiat currencies die eventually. Okay, it is unsustainable. So are you. I'm just questioning. It's interesting. I want to go back to database DNA. Everyone can be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. And I'm sure many of you can point out places where I've been wrong. That is not an indictment either on the person or the person's intellect. But this is the same thing. People take it personally, like with silver. You say anything bad. Bitcoin is even worse. I remember people, you say one thing bad about Bitcoin. Oh, well, they lose their mind. It's like you're talking about someone's mother. That's what happens once you become married to an asset class or you become a follower of a particular analyst. You tend to believe everything they say. Anyone says that they were wrong, they're, oh, no, they weren't wrong. It's almost like once you become a fan of Obama or Trump, you say Obama did this. They say, well, Bush did that. Well, hold on. Did Obama do what we just said he did? Yeah, but Bush did that. That's the analysis. It's actually childish. You ask a kid, did you steal the cookie? And he says, Johnny took one too. It's second grade mentality when you think that way, that you cannot say, yes, Obama did that. Was it wrong? Yes. No, but George Bush. And the George Bush people did the same thing, and Trump people do the same thing with Obama. I'm not picking on people who defend Obama. It's people who defend anything. They don't want to admit that there's any flaw anywhere in, like, gold is perfect, period. Silver, nothing. Silver is the only thing you could possibly ever have. It's the be-all and end-all. And that's how people align. That's what happens when you listen to the same thing over and over again. You listen to people and you see people in their screen names. Bitcoin King, Bitcoin, Silver Master, Silver, whatever it is. You become, you believe it. Your Kool-Aid level gets very high. And eventually it's going to be, I'm going to be the mug man. And everything's going to be about mugs. And if you don't like mugs, there must be something wrong with you. Mugs have been drinking vessels for 5,000 years. You should have a mug. If you don't have a mug, you are not smart. People who are smart have mugs. Okay. All right. Mel Tappan was telling everyone to move to the woods in Idaho and with your dog, beef jerky, and shotgun in the early 70s. Now, does that mean, I don't even know who this guy is. I never heard of Mel Tappan. Does that mean he's an idiot? No. Does it mean he was wrong to suggest that you probably would have been better off not doing that? Absolutely. All right. Dr. Modesto, Astor Place Theater riot. Don't know what that is. 40 corpses on the street because of differences about Shakespearean actor styles. Well, you got me on that one. I'm going to have to look that one up. We can call me Muggsy. Shutting up, Muggsy. Yeah, I am going to be Muggsy. I'm going to issue mug coin. And I really believe you should measure everything in mugs and should only associate with people who have bought a Smaulgld mug, because everyone else really doesn't know what's coming. They haven't prepared. You really should tell your neighbors about the Smaulgld mug, because I believe in it. And I'm going to maintain my integrity, and I keep one on my desk at all times. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Mel Tappan was the father of modern survivalism. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thanks for listening.